And we are live. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Reason, religiously educated atheists, secularists, and other non-theists, aka the Secular Round Table. Now, this week we have a very special episode for you guys. Godless parenting and why it is superior. But all jokes aside, there's been a lot of studies coming out lately about how secularism tends to be the more superior, I guess, moral outlet when it comes to, comparing it with religion and, these religious folks. And if you want to also dive into the households that you're raised in, which is kind of what we're going to be touching on tonight, um, religiosity is on the decline. And with that being said, let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead, while we stall for the godless engineer, we're going to tell you guys about our most recent video. I'll go ahead and go first since I'm already talking. I posted a video called The Quran's Challenge to Non-Believers, and this kind of came up because I was on Instagram kind of going back and forth with this Muslim group, and they were gangbanging me, man. There was like 8 of them on me. The guy was like, have you ever read the Quran? He's belittling my knowledge, and I explained to him, like, hey, man, I've read it like 4 times. I studied it in college. And he was like, well, then I'm sure you know about the challenges Allah has issued to all non-believers. I was like, yeah, bro, like to make a Quran 10 chapters or 1 chapter. I was like, I never thought of ever doing that before because, obviously it's been done by anyone who's ever wrote anything of quality. And so I was like, you know what? Hey, I'll add my name to that list. So that's what my most recent video is about. I take on Allah's challenge to non-believers by penning my own chapter that bests the entire Quran. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, well, my last video was, about a month ago. I haven't put one out recently. I've just been a little busy, other than pulling out clips from our, our discussions that we have every week here. But the last one I did put out was Christian comedians versus evolution and atheism, where I kind of, took Steve Harvey and Cat Williams and Tim Hawkins to task for their absurd strawman arguments and misrepresentation of evolutionary theory and atheism, and how they, use comedy to basically promote their ignorance and just spread this misinformation, and why that's even worse than just people who, just do it by just talking about it, because they're actually encouraging people to laugh at their own ignorance, basically. But I'm hoping to put out a video this week, giving my perspective on what happened with the Chapel Hill shootings. I was kind of waiting to, till everything kind of settled out, before I really, put my perspective out there, wait for as much information as possible. So I'm hoping to get that out this week, so be on the lookout for that.
All right, I'll go. The last thing that I made was a few days ago. Atheism is a terrible motivator. Go YouTube, Dater Lucum, it'll be right there. And this was in response to the Chapel Hill killings that were still... When did it happen? It was just last week. So it's still very recent memory. It's a very sad situation that apparently justifies all of the hatred toward atheists for some reason. And I just go into the entire idea that atheism is a terrible motivative tool or justification for basically anything, and that includes violence. So, horrible thing that happened, and it's really easy as an atheist to say that it was terrible.
Dieter, since you don't really have kids and you can't really, you could talk about it. Why don't you touch on that tonight?
Hey, I was a kid once. I know how kids roll. I'm a cool guy.
Yeah, but until you have a kid, you can't know.
I'm like so tired of that.
Until you have the discernment of the Holy Spirit, you can't read the Bible.
I really want to know what the child rearing equivalent of the Holy Spirit is.
Santa.
Well,
He sees you when you're
Touche.
sleeping. Alright, okay.
wow, I'm
Yeah.
uncomfortable all of a sudden.
Yeah, as are we all. Hello, audience. I am Chad. This is my second week here. I don't generally produce independent content, so look for my last video on the YouTube channel God Works Out for last week's question and answer panel discussion. So check that out, and I'm looking forward to talking about some secular child rearing now that I have a child of my own. So yeah, let's make it happen, friends.
I guess that's my cue. I am John Gleason, the Godless engineer. I'm sorry that I was late tonight, but just visit me on YouTube and on Facebook. What are we exactly starting out with here first? Is it just introductions right now? Yeah. Okay.
Tell us your latest video.
Oh, okay. Latest video is I got the Foxhole Atheists to do a yelling at stupid people and put it up on my channel, and so I got that out there. He addresses Rand Paul and his vaccine, or rather, seems like anti-vax leaning opinions, and Rand Paul was basically saying that vaccines shouldn't be mandatory and they should be left up to the parents' decision as to whether or not their kids get vaccinated. So that's what Randy did. I do have a Cult of Scientism video coming up discussing the woman that denies fossils, so yeah, keep a watch.
Yeah, we were laughing at this joke. We were talking about you being the celebrity of the group, now that you're getting all these big shout outs, and how does it feel to, I'm not really kidding about this, but how does it actually feel, to be putting out all this content and then to be recognized by people that you most likely watched? I know some of these people that have been shouting you out are people that I watched for like almost 2 years on YouTube.
Well, it's pretty exciting. I mean, I know that King Crocoduck, he shouted me out yesterday, I think, and I went to bed, and then I woke up the next day, and I had like 300 more subscribers, and I was like, well, something happened. And to be honest, the first place I went to was the Drunken Peasants. Because I figured they had found one of my videos and made fun of me or something, and so I'm just like, let me go and figure this out. But who else has been shouting me out exactly, or is it just the King Crocoduck thing?
I know Brennan said something about Hemet to Meta.
The Friendly Atheist, he wrote a blog post about the Christians Against Dinosaur video, and he linked to your video in the post and mentioned your name, and also Wildwood Claire gave you a shout out. So
well, that just seems to be a whole bunch of things going on at once that I didn't know
exactly.
about. I did see the Wildwood Claire video, although I think it was a little confusing with my last video being a guest spot for Randy Bevan, the Vauxhall Atheist. She mistook that for me, which I politely corrected her on and made sure that Randy got the recognition he deserves, because he did an excellent job on that video and addressing Rand Paul in general. And as I left the comment on there, I said that I hope that I can live up to his standard that he's kind of set for me as far as Wildwood Claire goes. So, but I didn't know about Hemet Meta. So that's really surprising. I'm still trying to figure out whether or not this Christians Against Dinosaurs lady is actually a Poe, because from what I hear is that she actually got kicked out of the Christians for Against Dinosaurs group because that's a Poe group, and I'm really worried that maybe she took it too far, and she actually believes what she's saying. I'm really hoping that it's not, but I'm leaving it up for that possibility.
Well, I'm calling Poe, and somebody on Twitter mentioned that Aaron Rao was trying to get her on his podcast, so maybe we'll get to the bottom of this after all.
Yeah, I actually gave Aaron her personal Facebook profile, but he felt that it was a little too personal because the Facebook profile seems to separate out her Christians for Dinosaurs thing from that, which I would like to say that I didn't actually go and try to find it or anything. It was just passed along to me as like you know, it's like, oh hey, look, this is the girl kind of deal. And apparently she's an insurance agent in Massachusetts. So I really hope that she's a Poe. If she is a Poe, it'll be one of the most epic Poes that I can think of in recent history, because I mean, she's not just fooled like one TV station or one news source or something like that. She's fooled her local one, Raw Story, and various other ones that have actually covered it. So if she turns out to be a Poe, I'm just gonna have to stand up and clap for her.
Wait, has she actually made it that far? She's like really appearing now?
What do you mean that
Raw
far?
Story and like local news?
Oh yeah, it started with a local news story, and then it kind of blossomed out from there with Raw Story, and then that's actually where I found the video I posted on my page, and so far the video, the last time I checked, has gotten over 250,000 views on it. It's also garnered a whole lot of hate towards me. I've had at least 2 or 3 messages sent directly to me telling me not to have kids. And assuming that I'm a Christian and that I've only been to Sunday school instead of actual school, despite my page name being Godless Engineer, it's like people don't even care about what you name yourself or what moniker you use. Nope, still Christian.
Well, I think that she's not a Poe because I actually spent the time and watched every single episode. And so if she is, she's not, going about it the best way. If she's satirizing this, she's not actually doing it to benefit anything. She must just be doing it to just, screw around.
Yeah, well, you see, those videos were actually uploaded like 2 months ago, so they've been sitting out there on YouTube for 2 months. She made a ruckus in I think a Facebook group or something, or no, sorry, it was actually a website. I can't remember the name of it right now, but there was a website where she made a whole bunch of ruckus, and she was like complaining about people indoctrinating her kids with this fantasy of dinosaurs existing at all, and so that caught the attention of her local news and whatnot. I don't know if she's a Poe or not. I'm starting to lean towards no, that she actually believes what she's saying. Because like you, I mean, I didn't watch all of her videos, but I watched enough. I watched enough to see, like, I saw the first one that she made, and she basically said that she had been indoctrinated into believing in dinosaurs. And so that was quite hilarious to me.
I don't know. Maybe
Let's
she
just
gets
say this:
legit.
if she is satirizing this, she's not a clever one. She's not doing it. If you take somebody like, what was his name, Edward, the guy I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, we know who you're talking about. Yeah, the Poe guy.
Yeah, he actually did it and educated people. He actually drew on questions, but if she's doing it, she's doing it very terribly. Like paleontologists making millions of dollars questioning the aerodynamics of dinosaurs. Like, this shit is deep, man. But anyway, we're gonna put her to the side and move on into the discussion here. So I figured I'd go ahead and start. There are some links in the description box if you're over on YouTube watching, and I'm gonna draw from those links for this discussion. So what I'm gonna do is cover a couple surveys and some data that has been compiled regarding godless parenting or secular parenting, and then everyone else can chime in with what they have. So this information is coming from Phil Zuckerman, who is a professor of sociology and secular studies, and Vern Bengston, a professor of gerontology and sociology. Now, this is relevant because Bengston has supervised a 40-year-long study of religion and family life, the largest one ever coordinated, and it's called the Longitudinal Study of Generations. And basically, religion is on a decline, and it has been since the 1950s. In the 1950s, it's recorded that 4% of Americans indicated that they grew up in a secular household. And if you compare that with today, 23% of our population in the United States say that they have no religious affiliation. Now, I'll admit that this data is a little skewed here because the atheists don't actually seem to be on the rise. Those people that are actually calling themselves atheists have remained kind of stagnant, and so has agnostics. But, you know, putting aside definitions here, that can really piss you off when people don't actually know the difference between agnostics and atheists, when you've got atheists around 5% and then the agnostics between 10 and 15%. But I can't really argue one way or the other, because it does seem that religiosity is on the decline, and that is a very good thing. Now, Bengston recently decided to add secular families to his study due to this religiosity being on a decline, and this group of people, of non-religious people, of atheist individuals and agnostic individuals, being such a large portion of the population. Now, Zuckerman also has his studies going on as well. I'll admit that it's nowhere near on the scale of this 40-year study, which is probably going to be monumental in really pushing secularism for us. But Zuckerman says high levels of family solidarity and emotional closeness between parents and non-religious youth, and strong ethical standards and moral values that have been clearly articulated as they were imparted to the next generation, chief among those, rational problem solving, personal autonomy, independence of thought, avoidance of corporal punishment, a spirit of questioning everything, and far above all, empathy. Now, in my opinion, the whole questioning everything, the skepticism and empathy, especially empathy is probably the tool, but those two things combined really are the driving force, I would say. Now, Bengston says many non-religious parents were more coherent and passionate about their ethical principles than some of the religious parents in our study. The vast majority appear to live goal-filled lives characterized by moral direction and a sense of life having a purpose. Now, imagine that. Those secularists, those atheists having a purpose? Those atheists having morals? Wow, that is so far-fetched. But it's really backed up. You know, we were speaking about Hemant Mehta earlier, but he did a FOIA request to the Federal Bureau of Prisons or something like that. I've got the link in the description box. You can check it out. And it shows that of the people willing to give their religious affiliation, less than 1% of the prison population is atheist. Now, that says a lot about what we were just talking about, having moral direction and a sense of life, having a purpose. Because when you're an atheist and you realize this one life is the only life that you have to live, you don't want to spend this life in prison. A Duke study that I've also linked in the description box shows that religion has strong ties to racism, and only religious agnostics were racially tolerant. Now, this has to do with a lot of in-group biases, but I'm not going to touch on those. I just wanted to give you guys the data so that we can move on into the specific subtopics of this discussion. So with that being said, godless parenting is winning right now, and I love it. I love that we are slowly turning the tide in this battle. We're actually showing that being a good person and believing in God are not synonymous. These two things don't have to be, conjoined at the hip. We can be good without God. And, my fight, personally, is a fight to make atheists a positive term, at least a neutral term. And that's really what I'm fighting for. So I've said my piece on that, guys. I'm very happy about all of this information that's coming out, and I hope they continue to do more studies because it's only going to be in our favor. I mean, they're showing that secular households are more accepting of science. What more can you ask for? I think that primarily most of the ignorance that persists in our world comes from a lack of understanding of science. And so that one thing would be totally okay with me. So I'll turn it over to whoever wants to speak their piece.
Ooh, pick me. All right, so
Hey, hold on a second. Hold on a second. My screen keeps like flipping to the Godless engineer. How do I fix that?
I don't know. My mic has been muted, so.
Yeah, it's muted, but it keeps like going back to you, and I can't. I don't know. I wanted to be able to see Dieter while he's talking. Sexy man.
It's fine. My wonderful voice will just act as if it's coming from Godless Engineer. Anyway, I don't have any kids. I actually don't plan on having any kids for a fair amount of time. I think I would need a partner first. Not necessarily, but doesn't matter. The criticisms I had of the studies that were given, twofold. One of them is the prison example is not a good one. And the reasoning is a lot of people convert to a particular religion in prison because it gives them, because people are prejudiced against anyone who doesn't believe in something, it gives them a much greater chance of getting paroled. So it's really difficult to say exactly how many people are actually religious and who are just pretending. So don't quote that because people have already kind of poked holes in it, so it makes you look silly, Aeolus.
Well, here's the thing about that. I think I gave a pretty good example of why atheists are not in prison. Now, if we compare our society to those Northern Europe countries, and we look at the statistics that we have there, or even if you just compare a state like Mississippi, which is the most religious state, and Vermont, which is the least religious state, and you compare different things like crime rates and things like that. I'm not saying a causation here, but there is a correlation.
No, there isn't. And that's kind of the problem with when you're making these sort of arguments, is what that does prove is that religion does not make you a better society. But it doesn't prove that atheism does. Like, it's a nuance, but it's an important one. Yeah, but it can be... Yes, you did. Shut up.
No, I did. I didn't say that.
Whatever, man. It's just that's the problem with a lot of these things, is it's really cool information, but it doesn't really say much of anything. And that's why I wanted to get to the longitudinal study, and we decided which criteria were good aspects for children to have, like rationality, like ethical things, asking questions about stuff, like all those things I would definitely say are positive traits. But if you were in a very religious household, those would not be good characteristics. So it's kind of a situation where we're deciding what are good characteristics and then judging people on only those characteristics.
To be fair, I do think the lack of racism is unquestionably good.
No, I would agree. I agree that like racism, prejudice, closed-mindedness are bad characteristics. But if I was super religious, perhaps I would say like obedience is the most important characteristic a child should have.
Yes, but there are certain things that I don't think anybody, religious or otherwise, would argue. Yeah, I would love for my kids to grow up to be racist. I would love for my kids to be intolerant. I would love, So there are some things that are universally good, but I do take your point, and I think it's well made.
No, this is also, it depends on your wording. Because if you live in certain parts of the United States, they would probably agree with you. They would say intolerance and like bigotry is terrible, unless it's against the blacks and the Jews. Like, it doesn't matter when you already have preconceived notions. You just don't put them in the same you just don't put them under the umbrella of the bad characteristics. You put them under the, like, God, it's like, I don't hate gay people, God does category.
To be fair, I don't think that you can actually compare. Now, I was just using that as an example, but the religious folks, everyone that I've ever came into contact with on this issue, have always said that everyone who goes to jail is an atheist, and then they become religious. And no kidding. This is a legitimate argument coming from them. Everyone that goes is an atheist, and then they become a Christian or they believe in religion once they get there. Now, I don't think that's true, and I don't think that just because the prison population is low for people claiming to be atheists that we're better people. Because, to be fair, I don't think that you can compare atheism, which is a lack of a belief, to any religion on this topic, because these are active beliefs. This is simply the lack of a belief, and you can't compare them on the same playing field. Now, that's kind of why I was talking primarily here about secularism, because with secularism, as I mentioned, those things like personal autonomy, independence of thought are things that they're teaching. Question everything. Compared to what religions teach, like you said, obedience, or never questioning anything, not examining the claims, having faith.
Well, I think that in lies the problem. Is just like I was saying before, it depends on how people are defining these characteristics. Because there will be there are tons of very religious people who truly believe they're absolutely rational and justified in whatever they claim is their rational thinking. It's the same sort of thing. It's like, question absolutely everything, especially a religion, except God definitely exists. Like, it's the compartmentalization that like every religious person tends to have. And I think if they said, like, oh, what's a really good example? It's like if you ask your kid or something, and it's just like, oh, I'm not religious anymore, then the religious parent would be like, oh, but you still believe in God, right? It's like the people. If you decide what the criteria is on what makes a good person or makes someone a rational person, and then judge them on that, you'll always get really good results. And that goes the same for religious households.
I would kind of like to jump in as kind of a segue, and I'd like to discuss the nuns article. I really think that number is very important. And I feel that way because of the fact that it means that people are getting out from being coached on their religion. They're getting out from having pastors and preachers telling them what they should take out of it or they should be reading out of it, and they're really seeing what it says in the Bible whenever they do examine the Bible. I'm not saying that they all will examine the Bible. There's a lot of people that will just remain blissfully in ignorance about it. But for those that actually do come out from underneath, pastors and other coaches and whatnot, they're going to read the Bible and they're really going to actually pay attention to what it says instead of having somebody else tell them what they should, like how they should perceive it versus how they've been coached to perceive it. And so I think that's a pretty big deal, because I think that as parents, at least, hopefully, we're coming more out of, believing in God as a default position, and God basically being a non-issue and whatnot.
All right, I'll go ahead and jump in here. Let me just say, with respect to the whole prison statistics and all that stuff, I agree. It's not a good argument to say that atheism makes society better, makes you more moral, or anything like that. It actually is just a good response to people when they say that religion, helps you be more moral, helps society, or something of that nature. So you got to kind of be careful with how you use that. And also it's really hard to get the statistics because a lot of people either don't understand what atheism is, or they don't want to own it, or they it's actually beneficial to people to not be an atheist in prison, as was kind of mentioned earlier, because people who are religious get certain time out of their cells maybe to do worship or whatever, or they get benefits. So it's to your benefit to say that you belong to a religious group, and that's actually why humanists have been trying to get that declared an official religion, as far as recognized by the prison system, so that they can be humanists and get the same benefits, but not have to actually say that they're Christian or whatever the case is. So aside from that, okay, all right, I'm gonna have to kick it over to somebody else because my kids are not here right now, so I'm gonna have to deal with that for a second.
Oh, one thing I wanted to mention real fast was just the idea that, like what Brandon was saying, this idea that not having a religion necessarily makes you a better person. I don't think that's really the case either, but it does give us one less excuse to do things that are bad. And I think that's actually a really important thing about being an atheist, is we no longer have the comforting excuse or justification of a god or religion. We're actually capable and responsible for everything that we do. Hooray! That's all I had to say.
Yeah, I think that that's a fair point, and I also think it's worth coming back to all the criticisms that we've mentioned of these studies and of the prison studies and everything are valid, I think. But I also think it's worth mentioning that the things that are universally considered to be ethical, like, for instance, I do want to say that this study, this longitudinal study, mentioned specifically rating higher in empathy, which is essentially, according to most moral philosophies, empathy is the #1 factor, right? So yeah, empathy is a universal positive. Everybody wants empathetic kids. Everybody wants to be empathetic themselves, right? I think even if you talk to the most hardened, ridiculous, religious whoever that only cares about their group or whatever, they still would claim to be empathetic people, at least to the people that they care about. And that is one measure in which this study has shown that secular parents are tending to do a better job, right? In addition to raising less racist kids and stuff like that. It's also worth mentioning that in the study they said that as these kids grow up, they tend to be less vindictive, which I think we could all consider a positive. Or I think the word they use is vengeful, but yeah, not constantly seeking revenge. I think that's a generally accepted positive trait. So I think that that's a valuable thing there. And also one that I wanted to point out that's mentioned specifically in this longitudinal study is coherent ethical beliefs. And now granted that could be a loaded term if the person conducting the study says, oh, well, religious beliefs aren't coherent because they're religious and they're supernatural and whatever. But this is coherent ethical beliefs, right? So this is saying if it's wrong for somebody to do X, it's always wrong for anybody to do X, right? So you can have those steady principles that you can rely on, as opposed to having to make these constant exceptions, having to do some constant sort of mental and ethical gymnastics that's sometimes required of those who really hold firmly to a religious interpretation of any ethical principles. So I do think that, yes, there are questions that certainly can be raised about these studies, but I also think they are providing some valuable information, and they are saying that, yes, in some cases, in some statistical areas, secular parents are doing a very good job.
All right, yeah, I swear my kids know what we're talking about here today, so they had to come down and join the show. But anyways, I want to get kind of towards, more into the whole secular parenting aspect of this. And as far as these studies that have come out, they've shown things such as kids raised by more secular parents are less likely to be racist, they're more likely to be accepting of science, things of that nature. And obviously we have to, remember that this is all just generalizations. This isn't going to hold true 100% of the time, and it's not to say that all kids raised by, secular parents are better than all kids raised by religious parents, or that, one's superior to the other necessarily. These are just, correlations. These are just things that are maybe statistically significant, or trends that we can kind of, see. But it's funny because, it seems that things are coming out in favor of secular parenting, and I guess it's not that surprising when you consider that, especially with the political climate in the United States, that religious fundamentalism, the more religious you are, it's really tied to your politics. The religious right has really firmly aligned themselves with the conservative movement, with like the Republican Party. So just because of that, you're probably going to be a lot more likely to be, skeptical of global warming, for instance, or maybe think that evolution isn't true, obviously, because you're religious. Not a lot of secular people are going to question the theory of evolution. So you can kind of understand why this would be the case. But even given the fact that it seems to be that secular parenting styles are preferable, or generating better results, I guess, it's not like we have a choice in the matter. I mean, I couldn't lie to myself and be religious, or teach my kids to be religious, or raise them to accept the Bible or the Quran or any other religion as being true, just because that produced better results. You know what I'm saying? So even if it turned out that like raising kids with religion actually raised better kids somehow, it's not like I could just go along with that just because in general the results were better. So I don't want to really point at the results of these studies or the conclusions that they're kind of drawing and say, oh well, that's really a good reason. But it is good anyways. It's encouraging that it shows better results as far as secular parenting. And there have been other studies as well that have shown that the more religious a child is, the less likely they are to be able to discern fantasy from reality, because they've asked them these questions. And that was another study that we've discussed in the past too. As far as me, I have presently 3 children, and my wife is still Christian, so we're a bit unique in that way. And the author Dale McGowan has actually written a book that came out last year called In Faith and Doubt, and he's also an atheist who's married to a Christian. And this book was kind of dealing with how you work through raising kids in this kind of mixed belief system, marriage, raising kids. And as far as I go personally, I agree that my kids should be learning about religion. It's not something that I keep them from, because you can indoctrinate kids with, secularism or atheism or whatever you want to call it. You don't want to do that. You don't want to indoctrinate kids to just reject religion out of hand without thinking about it. You want them to understand, what people believe. So I want my kids to learn, various world religions and what people believe, because it's really important. And I know that Dan Arl makes this point too. He wrote the book Parenting Without God, and he blogs on this stuff occasionally. And we were hoping to have him on tonight. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to join us. But this is a really key point, I think, because you don't want to, at least from my perspective, you don't want to keep your kids away from religion. You don't want them to not hear about it. Certainly I don't want my kids to hear the message that, they'll go to hell if they don't believe in God, something like that, because I think that's abusive. But I do want them to learn, Bible stories, or what people believe about the Quran, or, things of that nature, because it's really important for them to understand, for them to be well-rounded, for them to have a good appreciation for world politics and what other people believe, to learn about religion. And if you raise them right, how to question things, how to think critically, then they should come to the proper conclusions on their own. But, let them ask the questions. If their friends are, telling them about their beliefs and they believe in God or they're Christian or what have you, then, talk to them about it. Ask them, like, well, what do you think about that? And do you think that's true? And why do you think that's true? And so kind of work with them through it and see if they can kind of figure things out. But also at the same time, without, guiding them too much. You want to let them be able to think for themselves. So I think that's really important. So I mentioned a couple of books that are out there from some authors. Dale McGowan also wrote a book called Parenting Beyond Belief. So that's another resource for any parents out there who are, looking for guidance on raising their kids in a secular environment. So I think those are all good resources to have, and good perspectives, and for people to be able to decide, really how they want to raise their kids without religion. Because I don't want to speak for everybody here, but I know that I was raised with religion, and it took me until the age of 30 to really completely throw it off. And obviously, I came out eventually in the end okay, but it was a long journey, and I had to get there on my own. So it's really preferable if kids are raised to not be indoctrinated into religion, but to know how to think. And and let me just close this by saying that if my kids chose to believe in religion or believe in God or whatever, that's their own choice. Obviously, if they were open to discussing it with me when they get a little older or whatever, that's fine. But I will discuss it and talk with them through it. But if they decide in the end that that's their decision, that's what they believe, then that's their choice, and I can respect that.
That was lovely. Thank you for that.
I'd like to kind of speak on the issue of the religiosity and of prisoners and whatnot. I don't think it definitely doesn't give any kind of indication as to morals, because you can be a wholly immoral person and not be in jail, and that doesn't account for any kind of religion or religious ideal. What I do think that it does give insight into is the fact that it doesn't take religion to be a moral person. Like it pretty much just means that anytime you hear somebody tell you that, well, you need Jesus in your life in order to be good, or some kind of argument like that, I feel like pointing out the prison population and how they are, not just the number of prisoners that are in prison that are religious, but also the number of repeat offenders that are religious. I think that's actually a better statistic, how many repeat offenders you have, because of the sheer amount of religious individuals in prison, or those that convert while in prison. You would think that if they converted and they became a better person, that they wouldn't become repeat offenders as often as they do. So I think those are pretty good insights. Another good insight to look up, that I would like to see numbers on, is the relative like class level, I guess, or I guess how much the people made prior to getting in, because I think that if you look at those numbers at various different spots, you can gain a lot better insight as to who tends to be the most religious and also be a violent criminal or something like that.
Yeah, and to that, I just want to add too, some other factors that could be involved as far as the prison population is there's also correlations between, you're more likely to be in poverty if you're religious, or vice versa. There's a correlation there, and so that's obviously, if you're in poverty, you're more likely to end up in prison, but you're also more likely to be religious. So there's that. And then if you're more educated, and you're more likely to be less religious, and then you're probably going to be less likely to go to prison, at least for like a violent crime. Not necessarily for some kind of financial fraud or something of that nature, like a white collar crime. But as far as like violence and theft and things of that nature, is more likely if you're poorer in poverty. And another thing too is that we know that race plays a factor. If you're like black, for example, in the United States, you're more likely to go to prison. Well, overwhelmingly, atheists are white. So just on that fact alone, we're going to be less likely to go to prison just because we're white. So I think it's an interesting discussion. It's kind of a little tangential to what we're talking about with parenting and all that kind of stuff, but I just thought I'd add a couple other points there.
So what I wanted to say is, I wanted to also address one other thing, which is they mention in these studies that the secular parents tend to present more moral values, and these kids tend to be, um, you know, more moral, basically. But I wanted to give a kind of a personal anecdote on why that actually is. So, my kids were having this problem, for about 2 weeks where they were taking a pillow off of the couch and they were whacking the dog with it, like really hard, like whacking her. And so I sat them down and I explained to them and I said, hey, she probably doesn't like that. My kids are only 3, so they don't really get, they don't get it yet. But I sat them down and I talked to them and I said, she probably doesn't like you hitting her like that. Would you like someone to hit you like that? And they said no, obviously. But then I caught them doing it again later, and so I talked to them again, and then I caught them doing it again later. Then finally, when I caught them doing it, and I'm sure some religious nut job is gonna quote mine this, but I took the pillow off of the couch, crept up behind him, and just whacked him with it, and knocked him down. And then I explained to him, I said, you see, do you like that? And they said no, and then they haven't done it again since. Now, the point that I'm trying to make here is that if you tell someone that something is just wrong and you don't explain why, if you can't get them to feel that empathy, if you can't explain it to them, then it does no good to simply tell them that it's wrong, especially if they are tying that if they are tying that morality to an authoritarian figure. So such as me, if I just told them that it was wrong and not to do it, well, what would they do if I wasn't here and it was just my wife? Would they still do it? Most likely. They would probably just not do it when I'm here. But the thing that you run into is when you actually explain it and you explain why it's wrong and you can get them to feel why it's wrong. Now, I'm not saying, in the literal sense, go out there and every example do this to your child, because it could end up pretty bad. But this was a little harmless experiment that I performed on my kids, and it worked. They got whacked with the pillow and knocked down, and then they realized, like, hey, that's not cool. I didn't like that. So the dog probably doesn't like that either. And I think that may be the thing. If you're just telling people that something is wrong and you don't explain why, hint, hint, homosexuality, you just say God says it's wrong or it's an abomination or anything, I don't think it does morality justice. I don't think that you're going to create a society of moral people by just telling them what is right and wrong. You have to explain it. So that whole tangent and personal anecdote was just to make that point.
Well, all I heard from this is that atheists hit their kids. So I don't know what the rest of that was for. No, but I think like a fundamental thing is exactly what you said. You have to kind of demonstrate to anybody, not just children, that your statements or justifications for a thing are accurate. And sometimes this can definitely be done by like just rational discourse. But although I don't approve of your methods at all, I do understand the concept. And I suppose as long as it wasn't done out of malice and they weren't actually harmed in any way, that's just no, it's not. Don't hit your kids, Aeolus. It doesn't work. I'm just railing on Aeolus today because I think it's a problem because I understand that you believe that the justification was totally imparted onto the children, but they could totally just be thinking in the back of their head, all right, don't hit the dog until Dad's not looking, because if he's looking at me, then he's going to hit me again.
That is definitely true, but you have to explain it to them. There's a less chance of them doing that or seeing it that way if I actually explain it to them. Now, like I said, my kids are only 3. They're not going to get complex moral philosophy, but they haven't done it since, and it was something that they kept on doing, and I was trying to figure out, what can I do to make them stop doing it. And that was my little experiment, and so far it has worked. They haven't even picked up the pillow and hit each other since. So You could
but
be
that
right.
doesn't mean
You
they learned
could be right.
anything. That's the problem,
They're
though. That
only
doesn't mean they
three.
learned
They're only
anything.
three. They're just
They
barely
could just be afraid
self-aware.
to. Like I know it's a
Yeah.
very thin line, and it's really hard to tell like what is the best possible option. But it's like I can't see how someone could make the justification that like, yep, that definitely fixed the kids, because they could just be like, I don't want to get hit again, and that's the only reason I'm not going to do this action anymore.
Yeah,
So
so
think about
transitioning
that.
away from this awkwardly accusatory line of questioning, I think there are actually some statistics on corporal punishment. I don't count this as corporal punishment, Aeolus, personally, but there are statistics on corporal punishment, which I think it may be useful to share here in this forum. Essentially, what studies have shown is that children who undergo this that sort of thing, physical punishment or like beratement or things that are a bit more violent, a bit more reactive, those things actually will tend to make children behave in the short term, right? So if your kid is getting into fights at school and they come home and you spank them or whatever, that actually does decrease the behavior short term. The problem is that what happens later on is that these children are much more likely to become violent themselves, they're more likely to become abusive, and this type of behavior actually only escalates as they age. So essentially, any type of corporal punishment for anybody out there who is considering whether spanking your kids is good or bad or whatever, essentially what studies have shown is that it works in the short term, but it makes children more violent in the future, so ultimately not worth it.
Yeah. Go ahead, G. No, go ahead.
I was gonna get in on this part because of, I have a 5-year-old kid, and we never really did the spanking thing. We might get his attention by swatting him a little bit on his leg when he was younger, when he couldn't reason or whatnot. But it was more of like a, hey, don't do that kind of deal. That's what we did, and to be honest, going back, I think that I would be less prone now to do that. But the way that we've approached disciplining and whatnot is we have found that having firm rules and sticking to those rules is very integral to really teaching your kid the appropriate ways to act. Me and my wife, we try to stay away from words like good and bad and whatnot, and we try more, appropriate, inappropriate. Like when if Xander doesn't like something and he throws a temper tantrum or whatnot, we tell him that's not appropriate. We don't say that's bad or anything, but we just say that's inappropriate. And then we try to really focus on him and show him the correct way to express his anger, to how he can be upset and he can cry, but what he doesn't need to do is, throw his limbs everywhere and like hit things or throw things or something like that. Just, things that a normal child would do. And he eventually did get to a point where we could use like timeout and we could take away privileges and toys and whatnot as negative reinforcement whenever he did act inappropriately. And so us sticking to that, not giving in just because we feel sorry for, him or whatnot, and really putting into perspective how, what we're taking away and how we're disciplining him. As far as like, he's not gonna. It's not a bad thing to take away his bedtime story or something like that one night a week, or if it becomes where we just gave up with the stories, that would be bad. And so I think that, in lieu of corporal punishment or whatnot, you can have, these more these smarter ways to go about disciplining your child, and actually setting some ground rules for him on how to really know, how to act and what ways are not the correct ways to act or express certain feelings and whatnot. And I think that a lot of people, and I'm not being accusatory or anything towards you, Alis, or anything. I think a lot of people go for the short-term, like, corporal punishment method just because I get the feeling that they don't want to parent, or they don't want to take the time to really teach their kid. And that is no comment on you or your parenting there, Aeolus. When Xander was 3 years old, I would get his attention with a little, like a small smack on the hand, just enough for him to really acknowledge that I was speaking to him and that I was serious. But I mean, that's about as all that I did. And I really don't think that negatively affected him in any kind of way. It definitely didn't leave an impression on him or anything like that. So that's not to say that it doesn't. It may prove later on that's just wholly not a good way to go about it. And like I said, 2020 hindsight, I think that I would have done things differently when I was first parent.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good, point to bring up about corporal punishment, because studies have absolutely shown that in the long term, it has a negative impact. It may be successful in the short term, but in the long term, it has a lot of effects that are undesirable. And this is something that came up a lot this past year with Adrian Peterson in the NFL. He hit one of his children with a switch, and that was a huge story. He got suspended, all this stuff, and it kind of brought to the forefront this kind of culture, where he was saying like, oh, well, that's how I was raised, that's how we do it in the South, and we all know that in the South, it's the Bible Belt, it's very religious, and I don't want to say that there aren't atheist parents out there that would use corporal punishment, but I think that there's a cultural aspect to it as well. But there's also religious aspect to it. There's that book called like How to Train Up a Child that people have used to justify abusing their kids terribly. So there's no denying that there's some cases where religion can cause this sort of behavior to become acceptable, as far as abusing children. But as far as I go personally, I don't use corporal punishment because I know the negative impacts of it. But and like what Aeolus is talking about and what John is talking about, I agree with. Corporal punishment is like using physical punishment as a consequence for everything, or like really overdoing it, really like wailing on your kid, like spanking them really hard, just laying into them, using a belt or a switch or something like that. Completely unacceptable in my mind. I'm not averse to giving a smack on the hand or a swat on the butt just to discourage a behavior or something. My youngest son right now is 19 years old, or 19 months old, and when say he's throwing his food on the floor, first we'll like sternly warn him, oh, don't do that anymore, and give him a look. And if he kind of doesn't respond to that, then we just kind of give him a little smack, and then he'll know, But it's nothing, abusive. It's nothing extreme, and then he gets the idea. So I would never go anything beyond that because it's abusive, and the data is there to demonstrate that it's not effective in the long run. That it leaves people scarred and then apt to repeat this behavior once they are older or become parents, or even like in just relationships, to be abusive because they think that kind of behavior is acceptable, and the data is there to show that. So I think it's really important to discuss this topic. So I think Dieter has something to say.
Now I have a bear now, and now it's covering my chin. It turns out that there isn't actually much of a difference when it comes to kids. I don't have the studies in front of me, but they kind of see any use of physical force as a deterrent or a response to wrongdoing as basically the same thing. It's like there is a gradient, but the just light tapping or just a smack on the butt or something like that, that is included in the gradient. So it doesn't help basically it does exactly the same mechanism. It
Okay,
stops the kid from doing whatever they're disapproving of in the moment, and it normally does stop them at that time, and that gets locked in their brain, apparently.
I would like to inject some anecdotal evidence right here, right quick before ALS jumps in. But today, and you know, given that those things are covered underneath these studies and whatnot, and how I've confessed how I raised Xander, today Xander was almost in tears because about a week or so ago he killed a character on a video game, and the character hasn't come back. And so he's very upset over that, to the point of, and this was in Minecraft, to the point of he built a memorial for the particular character in the Minecraft game and had me write on a sign, Ender Dragon's grave. Okay, and so he felt horrible about killing this computer character in his game, and you know, I smacked him on the hand. So I think that they probably have a bit of a skewed study there, and I think that I even before, you know, the study really looked into the study. I mean, I think that there should be more studies done on it, because I mean, there's no way that one study is really going to capture the entirety of the phenomenon.
It's not one study. It's basically all of them.
Oh.
And the one thing I did want to say is, holy God, he killed the Ender Dragon?
Yeah.
That's freaking difficult.
Well, he was in creative mode.
Small child. What was that?
He was in creative mode.
Okay, I guess that's still
okay. Well, I had to put my devil horns on because, you know, suddenly I became the bad guy by saying that I corporal punished my kids with a pillow that one time.
The thing when you guys, okay, I hate to be that guy, but you guys are basically just like, well, I don't know if those studies apply to me. Let's use some anecdotal evidence to show that it's not actually accurate. Don't be religious people, guys.
No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that because we realize that even if the majority of the studies do show that corporal punishment is not working, there are going to be people that corporal punishment worked for, like me. Look, man, I was raised in the South. I got freaking beat down, man. Grandma get a switch off that tree, man, your ass is grass, and that's what she used to say. And I remember getting beat down so bad sometimes. Like the first time I ever used my middle finger, I got caught, and the girl next door snitched on me, and she told my dad. Man, he beat me down so bad that I can count on one hand the number of times I've used my middle finger my entire life. So, you know, as I mentioned there in the beginning, though, that's a funny personal anecdote. But even if it worked for me with that one thing, it doesn't mean that the majority of the studies are flawed. And, you know, I was corporal punished a lot, and not just beatings, but, you know, I mean, I used to have to do physical exercises, all sorts of stuff. But, as I said,
there are always two justifications I hear whenever it's any of this. Now, I don't think any of you are, like, abusing your children. I'm not saying that whatsoever. But I do urge you guys to read the studies and reflect on it, at the very least. Because the two pieces of rationale that are universal when I hear this particular argument is either I was beaten and it didn't make me turn out bad, and I'm not actually hitting my kids. I
wasn't rationalizing.
You're repeating the same thing I've seen from people who actively
I was not
beat
rationalizing it. I was not justifying it either.
Well, and I didn't mean for my anecdotal thing to come off as evidence against it. I in no way think that my one personal experience with it could ever really discredit an entire study. If it is in fact the entire study, then like I said before in my little monologue there, that I mean if it really does show that even that little bit of I guess smacking a kid on the butt just a little bit not even enough to blemish the skin or whatnot, just to get attention. If that really does prove to be detrimental, I would wholly go back and say that I was wrong for doing that. I wasn't.
I love free thinking people.
Huh?
I love free thinking people.
Yeah, I think that's a super.
You already said more than like anyone else that I've ever had this conversation with.
I think that's a super important point to make, right? Is that everybody has their own experiences raising their kids, and sometimes it starts out a little rockier than others. And, obviously people don't know everything that they should know about raising kids to do a perfect job, right? Nobody does a perfect job. But here's the key, is when you find new information to the contrary of what you've been doing or what you were raised doing or anything like that, you have to be willing to change your behavior, right? And I think that's something that a lot of us are willing to do, which is a very, very nice thing. And unfortunately, one of the consequences of religious belief here in the United States is that sometimes there's much more reticence to do that, right? In the Bible, it has the verse in Psalms about sparing the rod and spoiling the child, right? That's never going to change for somebody who believes in the Bible's ethics, and that's a problem. Even if studies show corporal punishment is not going to work, people who adhere to those verses are still going to use corporal punishment. And that's really the problem, right? It's not whether you make mistakes when you're raising a kid or whatever. It's the willingness to change and the willingness to do what is actually right when you have the evidence on your side to determine what is actually right, right? So I think that's really the key, is remain open-minded, remain willing to learn. That's really the thing, is always be willing to learn about how to be a better parent, and don't just go to this book that's really old and full of horrible things and contradictions and all that nonsense. Yeah, think about it.
Yeah, on that note about the religious aspect of it and not, sparing the rod, spoiling the child thing, I'd like to point out that there actually is a book out there that you can buy off of Amazon called To Train Up a Child. In this book, they perfectly explain how you can take a plastic pipe and beat respect into your kid. And the guy that wrote it actually touts as an accomplishment that he can break a kid within like a week or something like that. And I see Dieter is saying that there are worse things than getting hit with a rod and they
extension cords.
Yeah.
No. I'm saying in that book it says to beat like toddlers with like a willow switch.
Oh yeah, with him saying that he can beat respect into a kid within like 3 days. I mean, that's literally like you are abusing that child at that point. There's no reason a child should ever be scared of their parents. Their parents are supposed to protect you. They're not supposed to be scared that you're going to get a pipe and go all Christian on their ass.
Okay, let me ask you a question. What happens if you have bad kids, like real bad, like you've just got the demons, like?
Well, I'd like to jump in on this first. If there are kids that are indeed bad, I think that it would be a very much an outlier case for a bad kid to come from like truly good homes. And I don't mean they seem good on the surface. I mean like a emotionally and mentally well family. I really don't think that you're going to find kids that really come out of that. I think that it would be an outlier, although I don't have any studies to really cite that say this, but I would just say that with my own knowledge of how the human mind works and how it reacts to stuff, and just for the record, Chad, I don't know about anybody else, but I can't actually see your video feed. Yeah. But I think that if there's a bad kid in a home that seems to not act appropriately or anything like that. I think that that's a real big indicator that there are bigger problems in the house rather than there's something wrong with the child, like as far as needing more discipline or anything like that. I think that you have to really look and see what the core of the issue is that's causing them to act that way. And if it's gone on for long enough, they could be set in their ways and they could just be a shitty person in general.
So I'm going to talk really fast before Chad does, because I'm cool like that. The only thing I had to mention is it's just education. Just like everything else, becoming a parent doesn't instantly instill you with like all knowledge of child rearing, which is fine, because all that means is you now have the opportunity to learn more about something. And there's like kids with lots of developmental disorders. There are kids with a lot of like neurological disorders, and there are ways that people have already developed on how to raise those kids and how to discipline them and how to like calm them down if there's a particularly bad episode or something like that. All it really means is you might need to get outside help, like you might have to actually take a class, or you might have to like consult nurses or doctors, or you just have to do a lot of reading. It's not going to be easy, certainly, if there was a child who genuinely needed more help, but it's definitely doable. But it is often the case that children take up characteristics based off of the environment of the house they're in. So it actually might be an indication that, like, maybe the marriage, if the couple is married before they have the kid or whatever, maybe there's a lot of fighting, and the child acting out is the only way they can deal with it. Or maybe there's something out in school, if the kid's in school at the moment, who's something crazy like that is going on. So it might actually mean that the kid just needs more help than you can actually give. And that might mean you have to get a child therapist or something like that. And that's not a failure of being a parent. That's just recognizing the needs of the child and what you're able to do yourself, which I think that's fantastic. Yeah, try to follow that one.
yeah. So here's a point where I have to disagree with GE just very slightly. In that, so you said that bad kids are a very rare thing, which I completely agree with. However, I would contend that bad kids are a non-existent thing. There's no such thing as a bad kid, right? There are kids who have environmental problems, and that's a lot of the time parents just don't have the skills, exactly what Dieter was saying over there. And the parents need some training. In fact, my wife is a child therapist, but what she actually does is parent training. 100% of the time, she trains the parents how to manage the child's behavior, right? So it's never the kid. Sometimes there are kids who will have ADHD, they have oppositional defiant disorder, kids with autism, and yes, all of that can happen. That's also obviously not the kid's fault, but that can lead to some very, very challenging behavior. And in every single case, what you need is you can go to child psychologists, do behavioral therapy. You can do, once they're a little older, for more internalized problems like depression or something like that, you can do cognitive therapy. There are all sorts of things, cognitive behavioral therapy. And eventually some kids will end up needing meds, like for ADHD, for very severe cases or something like that. Sometimes meds will help, right? But yeah, in every case, never ever blame the kid for what it is that's going on. I mean, a 5-year-old is not making cognizant decisions about what's right and wrong, right? They're just reacting to their own brain chemistry and their environment and stuff like that. So always, I mean, you can always consult a professional. It's such a wonderful field that is not, people don't know nearly enough about it, and it's very, very helpful and very available. So do it. Yeah, child therapy. Oh, yeah, also, I want to correct one very small point, because if my wife watches this and I don't correct it, she'll be mad at me. So reinforcement is something that you do, whether it's positive or negative reinforcement. That's something to encourage a behavior. Punishment is what it is to lessen a behavior. So like what you were talking about, what somebody mentioned earlier, taking away privileges, that's not actually negative reinforcement, that's actually negative punishment. So just a term clarification, psychologists will be happy with me that I made it. So yes, thank you.
Well, I'll just put a caveat that I guess I was implying that it wasn't actually the kid that was being bad, that there was something, there's something deeper that is making that kid act that way, and so that I guess I wasn't explicit about it, but yeah, I think that's very well said, and I actually didn't know that about that particular type of punishment, I guess. And so I appreciate the clarification on that.
Yeah, so generally, our community tends to be a very nitpicky audience. So we have to try not to be that way. You know, of course, we're not saying that kids are inherently bad, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody here, but when we're having these discussions, we're not those other atheists out there that have got, if you're on social media, you post a very great post, but they nitpick the smallest freaking thing. They want to go on a long philosophical discussion about intrinsic meanings of words and things like that. Yes, yes. Yes, Chad. But what I wanted to say is because you guys have already crucified me, and I had to put up the devil horns. Is that I'm not totally against corporal punishment. Now, I don't think that you should be beating your kids down with a switch like I did, but I'm saying that maybe it could be used, um, and I'm not even saying the extremes of like what I was talking about, but whether we want to admit it or not, GE slapping his kid on the hand or tapping him on the leg is corporal punishment in a sense, and I think that you can use that to supplement it. I also think that in my personal experience, my parents never really did like hands-on things with me. Um, they didn't. They weren't present parents. So going back to what GE said about bad kids don't come from a good home. I think that that's true unless they have some underlying issues such as ADHD or something like that that is causing their misconduct. But I was labeled a bad kid, and so I was corporal punished all the time. But as I mentioned, I didn't receive any attention from my parents. They didn't do any of the reinforcement. They only corporal punished me, and that is a big no-no. I think that you can't substitute corporal punishment in for parenting and expect that a child is going to be okay because you're going to psychologically damage the child for one. You're going to physically damage them, and it's going to affect their life. Now, Dieter had mentioned some studies about how they turn out in the long run, and it's really not good. You may get your short-term desired effect, but in the long run, it's probably going to be bad. So I'm stepping out there to allow you guys to crucify me, the bloody lamb, and saying that I do support corporal punishment as a supplemental punishment. And I'm not saying that you can beat your kids down with an extension cord or a switch or just go gung-ho and fist punch your kids. That's not what I'm saying. Because, I mean, if we want to get really specific, as Dieter said, smacking my kid with a pillow was corporal punishment.
Well, I will say, regardless of where we end this particular part of the conversation, statistically, the number one most important factor, as far as I understand it, in children and compliant behavior and that sort of thing is not corporal punishment, it's not affection, it's not anything that, it's actually consistency. That's the number one thing. If a child knows what to expect from you, when they do X, Y happens. If a child knows that and they can rely on that, that is the number one most important factor in predicting that child's behavior and being able to encourage behavior that you do want and discourage behavior that you don't want. It's consistency, right? So lay out the rules, stick to them. Don't go back and forth all the time. Don't let your moods impact how you're going to punish your kids or anything like that, right? Stay as even as possible, as consistent as possible. That's the number one most important thing for behaviorism. Now, that's not to say that love and affection are not important, because obviously they are, but for different non-behaviorist reasons.
Oh, also, I'm gonna tell you right now, like I make my kids do physical exercises. Okay, just the other day I had them doing squats. Okay, so yeah, so corporal punishment. Yeah, squats. Once they learn how to do push-ups, I'm gonna have them doing that too.
I think that's perfectly okay. The only risk you run is that they'll grow up hating exercise.
Maybe, maybe not. I did my fair share of squats. That was my mother's preferred choice of punishment, that I do squats. And so I got some really strong legs out of it.
I would like to bring up an issue real quick. And that's, we've been talking a lot about corporal punishment and pretty much physical abuse, but there's another type of abuse that I've seen being doled out by religious parents a lot. And I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with other secular as parents, but one thing that I know I went through personally was a lot of emotional abuse. And, that's, when I was growing up, my mom, she would regularly make me feel like shit in general for even the smallest things. I remember when I was 16, I was coming home with my stepfather's cake, and I almost had a wreck. And when I got home, my mom, she was just pissed at me because a figurine fell over on the cake. Like, she didn't care that I almost had a wreck, and that it could have been a pretty bad wreck. And so there's that, and then there's a plethora of other things that happened leading up to that. And I just think that addressing the emotional abuse aspect is very important, because emotional abuse can sometimes even be worse than physical abuse. And the emotional abuse that I suffered has really driven me to being diagnosed with both clinical depression and PTSD. So I'm wondering what are y'all's thoughts on that aspect of this?
I would agree with you. I would say that definitely the emotional distress is worse than the physical punishment. Now, I had parents that subjected me to all sorts of things, but I always say that the worst thing that my mother ever did to me was neglect me. And so, we talked on this briefly before on the Atheists at Risk episode, but I never received any attention from my mother. So no matter what I did, she just didn't want me. She didn't want to have a child. And so to me, I always say that that was the worst thing. Like, she would have me in a corner doing squats, like hardcore physical exercise. People would come over to the house and say, "Is he exercising?" Like, she would have me doing that. I mean, I would get some really severe beatings, but out of all of those things, the worst thing was the neglect and never having a mother. And now, even though I'm older and I could have perhaps went on to reconcile this relationship somehow with my mother. My mother's in a vegetative state, so that's completely out of the window. So I went through life with no mother, and to me, that was probably the worst thing.
Yeah, I hate to be like that guy who's like, oh well, this is what studies say on every time you guys say something. But this is probably the only topic that's reasonably scientific that I know anything about. And studies do show again that neglect is both the most common and the most damaging form of abuse that parents can inflict upon their children. Worse than physical abuse, worse than other types of emotional abuse, belittling, and things like that. Neglect has the #1 worst outcomes and is also absolutely the most common. And it's absolutely a shame that so many parents engage in it. But I guess that's a good reason to say, pay attention to your kids. Give them a fucking hug every now and again. Like, just don't be an asshole to your kids. Like, make sure they know that they exist. And that's a really nice thing for you to do, regardless of how you punish them or whatever. Just make sure that you give them some love.
I think it's actually one of the most complicated things about being a parent, and part of the reason why I'm a little bit afraid of it is the idea of every single thing you do to that kid is going to make a gigantic impact on them as they get older. And the idea of like neglect, it's like, what does that even mean? To some children, it could very well just be, when I accomplish something, I want it to be recognized. Another kind of kid could be like, I need you to physically spend time with me to make myself feel like I'm wanted. So it's kind of just like, got to gauge what the kid actually needs, and that throws me. Like, I have no idea what to do about that. But I think
Imagine what you're feeling, and then compare that with Chad, who has a child psychologist for a mother. So just imagine what
That would be
she's
so
feeling.
much more easy.
She knows
I could just be
everything.
like,
No.
"She's
She
got
knows
this, don't worry."
everything that you're feeling. She knows everything that you're feeling, but then it's magnified because she's gonna nitpick every little thing. Like, what is this gonna do to my child's future?
Also worth mentioning that my mother-in-law, her entire career until she retired was spent in professional childcare. So a lot of pressure on me. Yeah.
the one thing I did want to also mention was this. I think sorry, I got hidden or something for some reason. I think one of the things that gets really in exactly the same way of what necessitates neglect and support or whatever could be the same thing with what actually is abusive to a kid. It would be really curious. Like, I don't even know how the hell you would do this, but seeing like what actually affects individual children more, like physical abuse or emotional abuse, because it could. I wouldn't be surprised if it depends on the child. But I don't know. I always kind of see those sort of situations as, like, if you're going to remove the knife that's stabbed into your foot, you might as well also get the axe out of your back. They're both pretty bad things to do, so why would we just not do either of them?
That's Dieter's PSA for this evening.
Alright, are we putting this thing to bed now so we can move on into my favorite segment of Reason? Brendan, I know, did you have anything you wanted to say? I know you were out of the chat there for a while.
Yeah, I was a victim of Windows 8 automatically shutting down my computer, unfortunately. But, yeah, I mean, just as far as what you guys were talking about there, it wouldn't be surprising to me that neglect would be the worst outcome, like you guys were talking about. Obviously, that's not to say that, you know, physical abuse is any better by any standard. But yeah, it's just really unfortunate because so many people out there have kids and they're just not fit to be parents, or they just don't put the effort into it. I mean, there's also the aspect where a lot of parents, they don't purposely neglect their kids, or they don't purposely mistreat them. They just are doing the best they can, or they're trying to struggle to get by. And I don't want to make excuses for it by any means, but because obviously there are people out there that have kids that just really shouldn't have them, or they just don't know how to parent, and they willfully abuse their kids. But at the same time, it's really easy to judge people when you're not a parent, I think. You can say these things like, oh, why do people do this, or how does this happen? But until you're actually a parent and living it, it's really hard to kind of put yourself in other people's shoes. And like I said, I don't want to make any excuses for anybody, but it's a challenge. It's not an easy thing to do, to be a parent, and it's something that takes a lot of effort and dedication. And you have to understand your own children's personalities and how they respond and what works. And it's not always the easiest thing to understand how to raise a child. So I think in the end, you have to do the best you can, and it definitely is important to keep in mind these studies and this information that can kind of guide you and tell you what works and what doesn't, and what kind of impact you can expect from certain approaches. So I think that's really all I had to add.
Yeah, and so many parents have their own psychological issues in the first place. I think that's one of the most important pieces of advice that I can give, and something that I am personally proud to have done is I insisted that before my wife and I had any kids, I needed to get my depression under control, because that's going to influence the way that you raise a kid and your capacity to do so. So I mean, if you're bipolar, if you're depressed, if you have ADHD or anything like that, get that shit straightened out for the sake of your kids. You know, your psychological disorders absolutely will influence how your kids grow up. So make sure that you are psychologically healthy as you can be, and then go have some kids that will hopefully be psychologically healthy as well.
Yes, indeed, that is the way to go. You know, we're talking about issues that you have there. I have a host of my own issues, but you know, I had to get those under control. But it's kind of like Dieter said, you know, you do one thing to your kid, and then you have to think. And this is something that I was terrified of, just because I can pinpoint things that my parents did to me that make me a certain way. And so, you know, when I think about that, like, okay, let me think about how I'm going to act in this situation with my children, because this one thing may be the thing that they remember for the rest of their lives. So you got to be very careful. But you know, I could make an argument here, because Brendan was talking about this. I could make my argument that religion sets people up to be, at least here in America, Christianity sets people up to be bad parents. But I think I'll spare you guys. And so anyway, we're going to move on into my favorite segment of Reason. Hypocrite of the Week! This week's Hypocrite of the Week is going to a pastor who lied to the police about a robbery that occurred. So supposedly he told them that he was robbed by a group of black men on the highway or something like that. But we're going to go ahead and watch the video, and then we'll discuss this. And also, he can't figure out why he is being victimized here by the police. So we'll go ahead. Let's get this thing up and going. Can I take my devil horns off now? Alright, can you guys see that? Alright, let's see if we can get some volume going.
Police said that Louisa pastor, who told us yesterday he'd been shot and robbed by a man pretending to have car trouble, was lying. They tell us after looking into the story, his claims didn't add up. Our Chelsea Rarick is live in Louisa County. She tells us what about the story didn't make sense to investigators. Chelsea?
Well, Bill, deputies tell me that really nothing about his story made sense to them as they were investigating. In fact, they tell me that they found his wallet and checkbook inside his vehicle.
I don't quite know what's going on.
This is George Hunley walking into the Louisa County Sheriff's Office Friday afternoon.
These gentlemen are bringing me in here for questioning.
Did they say anything to you when they picked you up at your house?
No, ma'am.
Minutes later, the 54-year-old was charged for making false statements to police. Hunley is the man who claims he was shot and robbed Thursday while attempting to help a family on the side of the road.
Everything right now points to us believing that there was no armed robbery. There was no biracial couple. None of that really happened.
Major Donnie Lowe says he can't go into detail about what they think happened. But after searching Hunley's home and looking at evidence, the story just didn't add up.
The vehicle that he was in, where he drove home from the robbery, there's no blood in it at all. And we did manage to find his wallet and his checkbook and everything in his vehicle.
Major Lowe says the department will also be looking into how much money was spent in resources for this investigation.
We will probably ask, the Commonwealth will probably ask for restitution for all the expenses and everything.
Hunley was released on bond, and despite his misdemeanor charge, he's still sticking to his story.
Well, Louisa, be careful.
Which story?
There's a couple out there that they need to be watching out for. Thank you, folks.
Even though deputies say your story didn't add up?
Well, I don't know how to comment to that.
Now, Major Lowe tells me that the public does not need to be Fearful that they're in danger, they're not currently searching for anyone. Highway's next court date.
Okay.
January 17th at 8:30.
Did you see? Did you see the look on his face when they were asking him questions? He was like, "Why the f are you asking me?" Now, hold on. I will say this. This does not comport with what I know about police. Okay? They really should have. I mean, he looked dangerous. They should have thrown his ass on the ground. They should have choked him. They should have put their knee on his head. Because, I mean, even though he's got a cane, he could have done some serious damage. I mean, they killed a guy for just handling some cigarettes in an incorrect manner. This guy lied to the police.
Yeah,
was
but this
white.
guy's white. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a
I
difference.
forgot.
All right, so let me just
Okay,
say-
let's not.
Hold on. This is important. Now, I didn't watch that video, but the one that I watched like the other day, he already changed his story. Let me mute Dieter since he is not me. There we go. But okay, so the first story that I saw when the news article came up is that he was robbed by a group of black men. And now his story, it went from a black couple to now it's a biracial couple. So even that part of his story is not adding up. And supposedly there's no blood in the vehicle. They stole his wallet and whatever else, but they ended up finding that in the vehicle. And you know, like GE said, they don't mess this up. Okay, the cops are not gonna mess this up because he's a white guy. When he came in with that story, let's just be honest, armed robbery, black suspects, come on, they were like, oh, whoa, we got to put this thing out there. We got to investigate this. And they came to this conclusion that I can just see how his story changed 3 times, and I'm not even investigating it. So the fact that he's changing his story this amount of times probably prompted them to dismiss this, and now they're charging him. And as GE mentioned there, his face when they asked him, you know, what do you have to say about this, or what do you think that they're calling your story a lie, basically? And he looked like he wanted to assault them. I'm just saying he shot himself.
Yeah, I'm not even sure, like, what was his motivation for making up this story? Like, where was he going with this? You know, obviously there's an element of racism there. He's saying that the people that attacked him were black. I mean, why would you make that up if your story's not true? Obviously the evidence isn't there. There was no blood in his vehicle like they were saying. The thing that really, you know, kind of pisses me off about this is that people act like it's so astounding or, like, unbelievable that that he would make up this story because he's a pastor or because he's religious. Like, I can't believe it. Like, why? I mean, he's a human being. He can lie just as well as anybody else. And this guy is pretty much a known fraudster because, you know, I was familiar with the story. I saw it come out in the last week or two or whenever this was in the news. And he also recently, him and his wife, they lost their house in a fire. And basically it was really suspicious because what happened was they found like a propane tank like really near to his house, next to like the barbecue or something, and he conveniently happened to be back in some shed in the backyard or out back or wherever when this thing exploded and set his house on fire. So, I mean, clearly, and I don't know if they're going to investigate this further or go into it anymore or anything now that all this is going on, because this obviously seems to be a case of insurance fraud, and that it seems like he, you know, intentionally burnt his house down. So this guy's clearly a fraudster, but I just can't figure out, you know, why was he making up this story? What was he hoping to get out of this? Do you guys have any idea? Because I can't figure it out.
Notoriety.
I mean, my only guess is attention. And I would like to say Dieter has been trying to get something out. I know I probably said something stupid. He's got to correct me. So please, Dieter, do it.
Obviously, for I am the paragon of all perfect logic, I will correct everyone. No, the one thing I do want to say is, like, I am, like... Oh, fuck you so much. Okay, so as I was saying... God damn it, I lost my train of thought. I'm in the same boat when it comes to police officers. I think there is a issue with the entire power structure, but I think we all have to be careful that like the police force is not like a monolithic like system that has like a pope of it. Not technically. And I think because of that, like there are so many departments that are very law-abiding, aren't racially fueled whatsoever. So like just assuming that it's just based on race without any evidence to support that feeds that like frenzy that's been going on these last couple years. That being said, his excuse is definitely like buying into this very specific racial idea that he has, and that's like it's really creepy, and it's like exactly like the South Park episode of like it's some Puerto Rican guy that kidnapped my kid. It's just like they'll believe me if I said it was black people, right? So I'm gonna say black people, and it's sad. I think largely he had no idea this would go anywhere. I think he probably was like, I did something stupid. I have to cover myself up because I'm noteworthy in the community or something. What the hell can I say that'll just make this go away? And now he's just getting completely screwed over because of his very, very poor choice of actions.
Yeah, I was wondering if the motivation was maybe that, like, he got bullets in him by some horrible or stupid way, and he wanted to cover that up. You know, if he was actually shot, like maybe he was at the gun range with his mistress or something, and like that's what he's trying to cover up.
No, okay. I've got the answer in one word. Craigslist.
Or what happened is Brendan mentioned that he did some insurance fraud, so maybe that backfired on him, and he had to go to the mob to get money. He hasn't paid them back yet, and they shot him twice.
Well, I don't know if it's insurance fraud. I can see him being on the side of the road and like shooting himself wherever, and then being like, "Oh shit, the car's still here. Well, how am I gonna get rid of it? I'm shot. Now what am I gonna do? Oh hell."
Yes.
Okay, but there was a video that I did a while ago, like when I first started my channel, and it was this bus driver who was shot like 2 or 3 times, and like he had a New Testament Bible in his shirt pocket, and it supposedly like blocked the shots, and you know it came out later that he made that whole story up, you know. So I'm not saying that it's far-fetched for someone to have shot him, but I think that maybe he did do it himself.
Yeah, it's a very bizarre case and very weird. But I would feel remiss if I didn't address a comment that Dieter made, which is about the police not being a monolithic racist organization, which, yes, they are not necessarily monolithic. However, there is, I think, undeniably a systemic racial problem among police departments all throughout the country, and it's based on the fact that people have become so afraid of black males. And I think that this is actually systemically reinforced by police departments all throughout the country. And yes, there are some good cops, but I would be surprised if you were to give some sort of, if you were to perform some sort of study on police officers and how much more afraid of black males they were than the general populace. I mean, I would be shocked if those numbers were low at all. I mean, it's just when you see so much crime, so the police departments are patrolling the black areas because those are the high crime areas, because that's where people were going when the police officer, under Jim Crow laws and stuff like that. So that's just never changed, and now black men go to jail, and so it's everything is built to sustain this myth that the black male is dangerous, and I think that that is absolutely pervasive throughout police departments throughout this entire country.
Very good. But let's get back on topic. So if it's not about the pastor, and I'm not a racist for getting back on topic either. Somebody's going to say that. He didn't want to talk about the problem of race in police departments.
I do want to say that you know, the fact that he's a pastor and that he lied, I mean, they're just, at this point, it just seems to be getting cliche, you know? I mean, not only do they stand up there on the pulpit and they lie every single Sunday, but I mean, now they're even lying about being good people, and like when they don't have to be, like they go out of their way to lie in order to make themselves look better or something like that. That's what it seems to be.
Yeah, I mean, we do this every week. We talk about a new person every week, and the fact of the matter is, we drill this over and over. Is that when you place, all of your faith and your hope in these people that are supposed to be morally superior, it turns out to be a bad decision. Now, I haven't been able to do my research on this guy. This is just an article that I pulled up, and I thought it was interesting to present. But now I'm definitely going to have to go into this and do a little research on his insurance fraud and find out, because the way it's looking for him right now, it's not looking good. He's definitely a fraudster after Prototype told me that. So for lying and maintaining your lie after you've been charged by the police department, trying to bring race into this, because it wouldn't be as crazy of a story had he not went from a group of black guys to a black family to a biracial couple. It seems that there is a race issue here that is being played out by this guy, and we don't know what's going on in his mind. But anyway, for lying and not being the moral superior that you're supposed to be in your community, we're stamping you with Hypocrite of the Week. And I hope that they do some more research and try to tie this in so that we can, go touch back on this later and find out something about this guy that we don't know right now. Okay. Also, I wanted to let you guys know we did a Hypocrite of the Week on a guy who supposedly he had sex with kids in 15 different states. Do you remember that? Well, later it came out, and I don't know if I want to release this video because now we've missed the main point of it, but later it came out that he was actually doing this to his grandchildren as well. And I was wondering if you guys saw that.
I haven't, but I mean, I don't know. The whole situation is pretty disgusting to me, and I mean, I don't really know what else to say about it. I mean, I can't see, doing that, to my kid or even my grandkids. It just seems horrible to me. So.
Yeah, and then another part of it was that I think one of the grandkids went on to defend his actions. And
well, he's just an old man. He didn't know what he was doing. I mean, he just kind of tripped and fell, and his dick landed in me. I mean, I really don't. I don't mean to make fun of a sexual abuse victim or anything, but I mean, for them to go and defend him, it just, I don't know. That was the first reaction I had.
Yeah, it's probably a case of Stockholm syndrome or something like that.
Probably. Nato Techie Brony says you should seriously get a Hypocrite of the Week stamp. Dieter has one that he just never brings out.
I thought it was a gavel.
Ballot. Unmute. You gotta unmute. Stamp that food.
All right, so for being a horrible person, Hypocrite of the Week.
Very good. Oh, Pip Monk's in the chat. He says, "Cut that fucker's nutsack off."
How about we don't do that?
That's corporal punishment.
Clearly, corporate punishment is not a good deterrent.
He wants to do that to me? That's hurtful. Oh, I feel sad.
No, he's talking about the pastor.
Fair enough.
He's just not gonna learn if you cut his nuts off. He just won't learn not to touch his own grandkids like that.
Well, I don't know. He said just the nut sack. He didn't say the nuts, so maybe they're just going to leave him hanging there. I don't know.
Please don't create that image.
Dangling nuts.
He'll learn. He'll just become more violent in the future.
Oh, now that's
Probably.
that's just banging on low hanging fruit right there.
John, I will find you and I will hurt you.
Okay, yeah, okay. We're gonna go ahead and wrap this thing up. You guys wanna do your thing?
Okay, I'll start. I am the Godless Engineer. I was recently given a shout out on the Friendly Atheist because I highlighted a possible creationist mom that denies fossils. And so far the video on my Facebook page has gotten about 300,000 views on it, so pretty ecstatic about that. I recently was given a shout out by King Crocoduck and Wildwood Claire. I appreciate both of them, and hopefully they'll see this somehow. But I really appreciate them giving me that shout out. And you can find me on YouTube at Godless Engineer. You can also find me on Secular TV. I do an interview show there where I interview popular atheists and atheist YouTubers. Let's see, I do that. I've got a Twitter, I've got an Instagram, of course I got a Facebook page. It just passed 80,000 people on the page, and it's now on up to 84 or 80,400, something like that. I don't know. It's getting a lot of exposure right now. So do find me those places. I also have a Facebook group as well as many subgroups to it. So just type in Godless Engineer or Godless Engineering, and you should be able to get in there.
And I am Brendan, the Prototype Atheist, and I am just basking in the Godless Engineer shadow. So my new life goal is to maybe be interviewed by him one day. But in all seriousness, I will ride his coattails wherever they will take me. No, in all seriousness, I have not been very active on the YouTube lately, but I do plan on putting out some videos hopefully in the near future. I've been doing some more things on Facebook. I post relevant articles and kind of my opinion and news related to atheism and religion and whatnot. I also been doing the Twitter thing. I get caught up frequently there with creationists a lot of the time, so I even got quoted by a creationist on his website recently. So that was that was pretty impressive, I think. So I'll take that as a badge of honor. But anyway, thank you. So you can find me all those good places, and I will pass it on to the next guy.
All right, apparently that's me. So I'm Data Lucum. Evidently, I just disagree with absolutely everyone because I am the paragon of perfect logic. And I don't get another applause. I see how it is. I am not... Thank you. You people. So I haven't been as active on YouTube lately because school, work, and video games just eat up so much time. But I hope in the near future to get a lot more stuff done. I have a line of like 119 videos that I want to finish. So that'll probably be pretty good. You can find me on Twitter, on Facebook, and YouTube. You can also see my actual podcast. I don't know who just joined us, but that's fun. I have a podcast that airs on Wednesdays, I guess now. Godless Voices, you can see it there. And that's all I got. Bye-bye.
And I am Chad, by far the friendliest person of this panel. You can find me on Twitter at @exemplary_Chad, and if you're into tabletop gaming at all, check out my podcast. It's exemplarydm.com, where I'll talk about all sorts of game mastering goodness. And you will find me back here next week talking about more atheist stuff, and this is hopefully my platform to fame right here, what I'm doing right now, because the least effort, really, for the most reward. So yeah, you can find me on the Twitters and check out my podcast, and I'll see you guys next week.
Well, now that we've got GE making his way to stardom, we're basically all going to ride his coattails because he's a member of this show. So we're just going to use this as a platform to get all of us notoriety. But we know that Chad is a philosopher, and he does like to write. He's mentioned that. So we're hoping that we can get him over to the blog to keep that thing updated for us. Maybe, maybe. Anyway, I'm Atheists, your host, a.k.a. your favorite atheist, and we thank you for watching this weekly podcast. Don't forget to tune in next Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be discussing women in atheism, and we have some women in atheism guests for you guys, and they're going to come and talk about their experiences, you know, how they fit into the atheist community, why are there not more women in the atheist community, and those are going to be some of the things that we're going to talk about. And then the week after, we have challenged, well, actually Nephi challenged us, old Nephilim Free challenged us to a debate, and he says he's going to show, so we extended that invite to him for March 1st for a debate. And if we do this, we're going to annihilate him, but we are going to make this an ordered thing. We are going to do it systematically, and we are going to shut him down once and for all. That's high hopes, because many people have taken that on, and yet he's still making videos. Apparently, he's come to my channel. You know, I haven't even been shouted out or recognized by anyone. But he's on my channel. Maybe that's where I get some of those Christian subscribers, leaving us a comment saying that none of us could last 5 minutes in a debate.
I watched Nephilim had a live hangout going on, and I watched the first little bit of it, and I have to say it was some scary shit. Just in general, because the Nephilim, he actually entertained a guy that was like, now listen, a lot of people say that I have schizophrenia. Most of them are doctors, and I'm not taking the medicine, but I know it's God.
Yeah, so maybe that's what we're going to be dealing with if he comes on to the show. But thank you, everyone, for watching. Don't forget to tune in next week, and don't forget to subscribe to these great individuals like the Godless Engineer, our new celebrity, Brendan, the prototype atheist, Dieter Lucum, the argumentative one, and Chad, the nice guy. So we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.